I've got some wild news about England's royal family. Royal drama is shaking up the United Kingdom as an unbelievable situation plays out inside Buckingham Palace. She becomes my Queen Consort. In a crazy turn of events, King Charles has reportedly given up the throne to Prince William. But wait, there's more. Queen Camilla has lost her royal title. Freely. Please let us not become. This has left the royal family and everyone else totally shocked. What made Charles do something this big and historic? Today, we're digging into the hidden drama, the power shift, and the explosive truth behind this mind-blowing royal shake, dash up the secret crowning. It happened quietly, almost in secret, behind the fancy doors of Buckingham Palace. A moment that would change British royalty forever. No trumpets, no waving from the balcony, no fake smiles for the cameras, just a heavy silence that hung in the air like fog. Inside the throne room, King Charles III sat with a stillness that showed the storm inside him. Then slowly and carefully, he stood up and held out the crown toward his oldest son. It wasn't tradition making him do this. It wasn't pressure from the government or the palace staff. It was urgency, a very personal choice, not made from weakness, but from understanding. The king had decided it was time. Without any big speech or royal announcement, he gave the crown to Prince William. The action was simple, but it carried the weight of hundreds of years. Camilla stood to the side, frozen, her face looking graceful but hiding the shaking beneath. For years, she had stood next to Charles as queen, the partner who had dealt with judgment, silence, and storms. But right now, she was just watching, not queen, not partner, not ruler. Her power had disappeared in the quiet of the throne room. When Charles hugged his son, everyone at court froze in place. Top aides looked at each other nervously, shocked by this quiet rebellion against royal rules. It was just one hug. But in that embrace, 1,000 unspoken words passed between father and son. One king was stepping back. The next was stepping forward. This wasn't a ceremony. It was giving up a transfer of power, done not with drama, but with purpose. Charles's hands stayed steady, but his eyes were wet. Not from being weak, but from finality. He knew this was his goodbye. William didn't rush forward. He moved slowly, almost carefully, toward the crown. There was no hunger in his look, only quiet determination. His eyes weren't focused on the jewels or the throne, but on his father, the man who had carried the weight of a crown and now chose to put it down. Duty weighed heavily on William's shoulders, but there was readiness in his silence. A change had happened, not just from one king to another, but from one time period to the next. And standing at the edge of history, Catherine, calm and put together, showed the strength of the new age she was entering. The royal family wasn't falling apart. It was changing. Hours later, the palace confirmed what the walls already knew. A carefully written statement, without emotion but full of meaning, announced that Queen Camilla's title had been taken away. From now on, she would be known as Queen Consort Emerita, a ceremonial name that was symbolic but stripped of all power, duty, and influence. Her schedule was cleared, her staff was quietly let go. Her crown was removed not in front of cameras, but privately in her room. There was no big reaction, no scandal, only silence. The woman who had once fought for recognition was now being erased with class. Her chapter had closed gracefully, carefully, completely. And how could a queen once at the center of drama and scandal disappear so quietly, leaving only silence behind her story? The king's final bow. Before the crown ever touched Prince William's head, before the cameras could click or the whispers spread beyond palace walls, there was one last talk. Quiet, personal, and heavy with history. King Charles III asked to see Camilla alone. No advisors, no helpers, just two people who had faced decades of judgment together. What happened between them wasn't an order, and it wasn't an apology. It was something much simpler and much more final. "It's time," he told her. Those two words carried the full weight of a reign, a marriage, and a legacy. Camilla didn't argue. She didn't beg. She looked at him with understanding, a kind of tired grace that only those who have lived under constant public attention could know. Her lips shook, but her voice didn't. "I understand," she whispered. For months, whispers had filled the hallways of Buckingham Palace. There were rumors about the king's declining health, about exhaustion that no medicine could fix, and about his growing wish to step back before duty ate up what little peace he had left. Some said it was about his health. Others believed it was about giving William the freedom to lead without shadows. But in truth, Charles's decision wasn't about politics or planning. It was about peace, his own and the nation's. He had spent his life waiting for the crown, then years carrying it. Now he simply wanted the royal family to survive beyond him. This wasn't giving up the throne because of failure, but because of faith, a father's quiet surrender for his son's future. That final private choice, made not in public drama, but in whispered honesty, would be felt far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. And with that, Charles stepped out of the spotlight. Not broken, not beaten, simply done. The weight of the moment shifted. The room, once heavy with tension, now felt frozen in stillness as all eyes turned to Prince William. The crown, polished, shining, almost haunting in its silence, sat on its cushion. He didn't grab for it. He paused, took a breath, then looked toward his father, the man who had just given up everything. There was no clapping, no victory song, just quiet recognition. William walked toward the throne with a slow, careful grace. Each step seemed to echo with the footsteps of those who came before him: Elizabeth, George, Edward, kings and queens who had carried the same impossible weight. But this time felt different. There was no hunger in his eyes, no hint of winning, only duty, only love. When he finally took the crown, he didn't lift it high or bow deeply. He simply stood still and steady, as if absorbing the storm that now belonged to him. The air itself seemed to pause history, holding its breath. From the corner, Catherine stood tall, her face calm but strong, her presence radiating quiet strength. She didn't need jewels or ceremony to command the room. She already embodied the modern spirit the royal family desperately needed. And somewhere behind the velvet curtains, Camilla watched. The woman once at the center of the story, now fading into its edges. But what made the woman once crowned in controversy become the silent witness to her own ending? Was this fate or quiet justice? Keep watching. The quiet exit. While Prince William took his first careful steps into being king, Camilla took her final ones as queen. There was no announcement, no cameras flashing, no carefully written farewell broadcast to the nation. It happened in silence, dignified, restrained, almost eerily peaceful. In the huge room where kings and queens had risen and fallen for centuries, Camilla lowered her head and gave a small, graceful curtsy. It lasted only a moment, but it carried the weight of an entire reign ending. Her eyes glistened, not from drama, but from understanding. She knew what this moment meant. There would be no more official appearances, no more royal duties, no place at the center of the royal family's endless rhythm. Her title was gone, her power dissolved, and her name quietly rewritten in palace records. Still, she held her posture with quiet pride, showing the same restraint that had once made her so controversial. No photographers were calling her name, no aides hurrying at her side. The long hallways of Buckingham Palace, once alive with footsteps and ceremony, now echoed softly as she walked through them alone. She entered the royal spotlight, controversially, but she left it quietly with the same determination that had defined her journey. Only this time, there was no defiance left in her walk. No need to fight, no role left to defend. Inside the palace, witnesses talked about her composure. She didn't hang around to watch the rest of the ceremony. She didn't look back toward the throne that had, for a short moment in time, carried her name. Instead, she walked out with a steady calm, her figure fading down the marble hallway like a memory dissolving into history. Her leaving was final, deliberate, and deeply symbolic. No palace announcement called her Queen Camilla again. From that day forward, she was only called Queen Consort Emerita, an elegant title, soft and ceremonial, but empty of power. A title meant to honor without including, to remember without inviting. For years, she had been one of Britain's most talked about women, judged, defended, made fun of, but undeniably visible. Every move, every appearance, every word was analyzed under the harsh light of public attention. But now that light had dimmed. Her name, once constant in headlines and conversations, began to vanish from view. The public stage that had once defined her life was now closed to her entirely. And yet, even as her presence was gently erased from the royal family story, there was something poetic about the silence that followed. Her exit was not marked by scandal or outrage. It was measured, graceful, almost royal in its restraint. She left not as the woman who fought for her place, but as the one who accepted her ending. But just before she disappeared behind palace walls, one unseen moment rewrote history. What really happened, and why? Stay with us to uncover the unseen goodbye. When the ceremony ended and the weight of history settled into silence, the cameras turned away and the royal crowd began to leave. The golden doors of Buckingham Palace closed softly, muffling the echo of centuries-old tradition. But behind those doors, something unexpected happened. A private moment no one had planned, and very few even noticed. Prince William, freshly crowned and still taking in the hugeness of what had just happened, stepped away from the grand halls and applause. His face was calm but thoughtful, as if something unfinished hung in the air. Down a quiet hallway, away from the formalities and the watching world, he found her. Camilla. No guards announced him. No aides followed. It wasn't a meeting set up by rules or palace planning. It was spontaneous, deeply human, the kind of encounter that royal history rarely records but never forgets. In that silent hallway, two paths that had long run side by side finally crossed for the last time. Witnesses described the scene as tender but restrained. William approached with a kind of stillness, his face neither cold nor victorious. He wasn't there to confront or to apologize. He came to acknowledge, to recognize that for all the storms, controversies, and scars that had shaped their family, this was the moment to close the circle. No one heard their full conversation. The palace has never released details, and those who were close enough to see it have stayed carefully quiet. But one source, speaking only in pieces, described it using a single word: healing. William reportedly gave a gentle hug, brief, unplanned, but heavy with meaning. It wasn't the kind of gesture that belonged in a royal ceremony. It was something much simpler. It was human. For the first time, there were no crowns, no titles, no expectations hanging between them. Just two people standing at the edge of an ending. Camilla's response was quiet, her voice barely above a whisper. "Take care of them," she said. Those who overheard knew exactly what she meant. She wasn't talking about herself. Her words carried the weight of a lifetime spent beside a man who had just given up his throne. She meant Charles, and beyond him the family, the fragile institution that had once defined her. The moment passed quickly. There were no cameras, no grand gestures. Just a soft nod between two people who had shared the same world but rarely the same peace. When they turned away, it was final. Neither looked back. It was the kind of ending few ever see, quiet, unpublicized, but deeply symbolic. In that dim hallway, the old royal family and the new one met, not in confrontation, but in understanding. And as their footsteps faded in opposite directions, so too did a long, complicated chapter of royal history. So, how did a single, silent exchange between two royals, unfilmed, unspoken, unseen, send shockwaves through every corner of the world? Stay glued. The ripple across the world. The moment Buckingham Palace released its official statement confirming that Camilla's royal title had been removed, the world seemed to stop. And then, almost instantly, it exploded. What had happened behind palace walls in silence now thundered across screens and social feeds in every corner of the globe. Within minutes, hashtags like Camilla stripped and New King William started climbing worldwide trends, sparking an online storm that no one could contain. The reactions came fast, raw, and deeply divided. For some, it was poetic justice, the long-awaited end of a story that had spanned generations of royal drama. Others saw something sadder, even tragic, in the quiet removal of a woman who had dealt with decades of public judgment. Comment sections filled with emotion, admiration, anger, sympathy, vindication. She was never meant to be queen. One post read, echoing an old feeling now sharpened by finality. Another user wrote, a graceful exit. No scandal, no drama, just closure. Those few words seemed to capture the complicated mood of the moment. For many, this wasn't just a royal reshuffling. It was the emotional ending to a story that began long before William's crowning, long before Charles's rise to power, stretching back to the most dramatic chapters of the modern royal family. Every memory, every controversy, every tear in that royal story seemed to come back all at once. TV networks across Britain cut into regular programming, dropping scheduled shows to cover the breaking news. Royal reporters scrambled to make sense of it, their voices tinged with disbelief. Experts on live panels debated whether this was a graceful transition or a quiet exile. International media outlets quickly joined in, their headlines switching between shock and admiration. By evening, the tone of the discussion had shifted from outrage to reflection. The royal family, once again, had become the mirror of a nation's emotions, a mix of fascination and exhaustion, judgment and empathy. William and Catherine, stepping forward with quiet dignity, were praised as symbols of stability. Their calm presence was described as a new era of restraint, a generation ready to rebuild trust with a world that had grown tired of scandal. And yet, even as the focus turned to the new king and queen, it was Camilla's absence that stuck most heavily in the public consciousness. Her name, stripped of title but still echoing through every headline, carried a strange weight. She had been both the most criticized and most defended woman in the royal story. And now, she was neither. The shock of King Charles's silent step back only deepened the public reaction. It felt less like a transition of power and more like the closing of a dynasty's emotional chapter. As the world debated, celebrated, and mourned in equal measure, one truth became undeniable. The royal family had changed forever. And while the nation watched, one woman, once at its very heart, was already fading into the shadows, her story finally reaching its quiet end. Now, as the crown's glow dimmed, one question remained. Had Britain witnessed renewal or the quiet fall of its oldest power? Stay tuned. The last light in the palace that night. Long after the applause had faded and the palace gates had closed, Camilla walked back to her private rooms, alone. There was no group following her this time, no advisors waiting by the door, no cameras chasing her every step. The echo of her heels in the marble hallway was the only sound that filled the space. Soft, steady, final. Behind her, the palace slept. Ahead of her, only silence waited. When she reached her room, the air carried a strange stillness, as if even the walls understood what had just happened. She looked around at the space that had once been her sanctuary, where royal jewels sparkled on the vanity. And the smell of fresh flowers arrived every morning by royal order. Now the flowers were gone. The jewels had been quietly packed away. The diamond tiara she had once worn so proudly at state dinners sat inside a velvet-lined case. Its shine dimmed under soft fabric. They were no longer hers. Not officially, not emotionally, and no longer symbols of her place in history. Insiders say she whispered only one sentence that night. Turning to Charles, who stood quietly nearby, she said softly, "It was an honor, even when it was hard." There were no tears, no dramatic gestures, no resistance, just calm acceptance. The kind that comes only from a woman who has faced storms and learned not to fight the tide. In the connecting rooms, her personal staff had already begun the quiet work of taking apart her presence from royal life. Her private office was cleared. Appointments struck from the calendar. Invitations once addressed to Her Majesty the Queen were redirected. The staff who had served her for years were told their jobs had ended. It was as if the world had turned a page and her name had slipped from the script. One aide described it as a royal vanishing act, not forced, but final. Everything about it was deliberate, graceful, and deeply private. No tabloid scandal, no whispered fight, no trace of embarrassment. Only stillness. Camilla didn't dwell on the past or demand to be seen. She sat for a long while in silence, her reflection framed by the dim glow of the lamps. The woman in the mirror was no longer the queen the world had debated, defended, and picked apart. She was simply Camilla, quiet, plain, and at peace with the end of her chapter. When she finally removed her last piece of jewelry, a simple ring she had worn through countless royal events, she placed it on the table beside her and let out a long, steady breath. Her reign had not ended in flames or disgrace, but in stillness. And how does Charles's silent retreat reshape the royal family's future? Was this giving up or strategy? You won't want to miss this. The king who knew when to let go. When the moment finally came, there were no trumpets, no waving crowds, and no grand farewell speech broadcast to the world. After years on the throne, King Charles III simply stepped back, quietly, carefully, and without fighting. His departure from power was not marked by a parade down the street or a ceremonial goodbye. Instead, it was sealed in a private conversation held behind closed doors, spoken in low voices between father and son. It was calm, it was dignified, and it was final. From that day forward, Charles would no longer rule as king. His new title, Advisor Emeritus, carried its own quiet meaning. Not king, not regent, not ruler, but a steady hand ready to guide, if asked. It was the title of a man who had chosen wisdom over pride. From then on, he would attend no major state events unless personally invited by his successor, King William. His once powerful voice, a force in global talks on climate, architecture, and social reform, would no longer echo in official settings. The royal seal that had approved countless state documents throughout his reign was retired, preserved as a relic of a chapter now closed. It wasn't the end of a reign. It was the end of a presence. Those closest to him say the decision wasn't made quickly, and it wasn't born from weakness or defeat. It was, as always with Charles, about timing, about awareness, about knowing when the moment had come. He had spent decades preparing for the crown. But in the quiet rhythm of his later years, he began to see something else. The readiness of the next generation. He had watched William not as a prince, but as a man, a husband, a father, and a leader shaped by both tradition and change. In William's strength, Charles saw the stability the future needed. In his empathy, he saw a new kind of royal family, one that could bridge duty and modern life in ways the past never allowed. And so, with full understanding of what it meant, he stepped aside. He knew the danger of staying too long, of becoming a figure too familiar to fade gracefully. He understood the weight of legacy, the quiet pressure every king feels when history begins to whisper that it's time. Charles didn't want to be remembered as the king who held on too tightly. He wanted to be remembered as the one who knew when to let go. There was no scandal, no push from the government, no tension in the air. This was not giving up the throne because of crisis, but a handover born of trust, a transition carefully measured and deeply rooted in love. Love for the crown, love for his country, and yes, for Camilla, the woman who had stood beside him through decades of judgment and change. His reign may not have stretched long across history's timeline, but its impact was undeniable. Charles had modernized the royal family in quiet, lasting ways. He had rebuilt trust, softened old wounds, and served as the bridge between an aging tradition and a new future. And as he placed that bridge behind him, a new light rose to meet the dawn. Charles didn't lose his legacy that day. He secured it. So, what unseen truth pushed Charles to give up power so quietly? And how did that single choice reshape the palace? A new rhythm inside the palace walls. The morning after the crown passed to Prince William, Buckingham Palace did not look or feel the same. The shift was almost touchable, a quiet but undeniable pulse that ran through its ancient hallways. The air felt charged, the kind of stillness that follows a storm but hums with new beginnings. Phones rang earlier than usual. Footsteps echoed faster. Conversations once leisurely and formal were now hushed and urgent. It wasn't chaos. It was control, not panic, but precision. The royal family had entered a new rhythm, and no one dared fall behind. Royal aides, many who had served through multiple reigns, moved like clockwork. There was no confusion, no visible tension. Only the crisp coordination of people who understood history was happening around them. Files were carried quickly. Doors opened with purpose. Memos arrived not by the hour, but by the minute. This was a transition in motion, rehearsed by some, unexpected by many, but unstoppable for all. And then came the first visible sign of change: Queen Camilla's private office. By dawn, the once busy hub of her schedule had fallen silent. Staff were called in small groups, their faces a mix of disbelief and composure. Longtime aides, people who had stood by her for years, through public criticism and quiet victories, were thanked personally. Many were offered early retirement packages or quiet transfers within the royal system. Some simply bowed and left without a word. It was the palace's way, polite, precise, but final. Her public schedule, once filled with charity appearances, gallery openings, and diplomatic receptions, was cleared in one quick move. No gradual farewell, no lingering presence. In less than a day, Camilla was erased from the royal calendar. Her charities and sponsorships were quickly reorganized. Some folded into bigger royal programs, others smoothly transferred to Catherine, Princess of Wales, who now carried herself with a new, quiet authority that everyone noticed, but no one dared discuss out loud. By mid-morning, the transformation spread beyond Buckingham Palace to Clarence House, rooms that had once hosted. Camilla's private meetings were stripped bare. Portraits taken down, stationery removed, personal keepsakes carefully boxed and labeled. In their place, a new crest gleamed above the doorway, the symbol of the House of Wales. Every file, every emblem, every trace of the old order was replaced with symbols of renewal. Even the smallest details were not spared. The media team went through an overnight overhaul. Longtime press officers were replaced by younger, sharper strategists, professionals loyal to William and Catherine's modern, streamlined vision for the royal family. Uniforms were subtly updated, the colors cooler, the lines cleaner, mirroring the couple's preference for contemporary elegance over luxury. What began as an administrative reshuffle evolved into something bigger, a full-scale reinvention of the royal machine. William and Catherine now led not just in title, but in tone. Every invitation, every statement, every appearance bore their mark. Tradition had not disappeared. It had been reimagined. And by the time the palace clock struck noon, one truth had settled across the royal estate like sunlight breaking through mist. A new rhythm had begun, sharper, quieter, more certain, and it beat entirely to the sound of the future. Now, what hidden message lay beneath William's calm words, a promise of renewal, or a quiet warning to the old guard? The speech that rewrote the crown. Later that same week, the moment the nation had waited for finally arrived. King William, no longer the heir waiting in the shadows, stepped into the light to speak directly to his people. There was no golden chair at his back, no robe heavy with history. Instead, he stood against the national flag, the setting stripped of grandeur but heavy with meaning. It was simple, modern, and deeply symbolic. The message was clear even before he opened his mouth. A new kind of king had arrived. The speech itself was brief, but every word landed with weight. William spoke without a teleprompter, without notes, without the trappings of ceremony. His eyes locked onto the camera, steady and unwavering, as if speaking not to millions, but to each individual watching. His words were plain but powerful. A new era begins with unity, with service, with love. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was respectful. He began with gratitude, honoring his father, not only for his reign, but for something rarer still in royalty: the wisdom to step aside. William praised Charles's quiet strength, his courage in knowing when to let go, and the grace with which he passed the crown forward. And then, in a softer tone, he turned to Camilla. With no fancy words and no pretense, he acknowledged her unwavering loyalty during years when support was scarce. She stood by the king when few did, he said. That deserves our gratitude. Simple, honest, true. But what struck the nation most was not the script, but the spirit behind it. William's voice was calm but firm, measured but deeply human. He did not sound like a distant figurehead reading royal phrases. He spoke as a husband, a father, and a son. He avoided fancy political promises or long-winded reforms. Instead, he gave a single promise: to listen, to serve, to lead not above the people but alongside them. "I do not wear this crown alone," he said. "I carry it with you and for you." For the first time in decades, the royal family did not feel cold or untouchable. It felt close. Even longtime critics paused, acknowledging something different in his tone: a warmth, a humility, a promise that this reign would be about more than titles and tradition. By the end, the message was undeniable. The royal family would not disappear into history, nor would it cling blindly to the past. It would evolve, carrying forward with humanity, humility, and heart. Camilla had stepped away in silence. Charles had given up power with dignity, and William had risen not with pomp, but with purpose. The crown, once a symbol of distance, now felt reborn in the hands of a king, determined to make it belong to the people once again. So, what do you think? Did King Charles's quiet surrender and Camilla's graceful exit mark the royal family's rebirth or its reckoning? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.